Welcome to the People of Purpose Talk Show community. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with someone whose work is reshaping how we think about education, equity, and what it means to truly belong in an institution, in a country, in a world that isn't always built with you in mind. Dr. Pearl Subban is an associate professor and associate dean of equity and inclusion at Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. She was born and raised in South Africa, and she has built a remarkable career spanning continents. Her voice on women's empowerment in education is one that every one of us needs to hear. Dr. Subban, Pearl, my childhood friend, welcome to the podcast. It is such an honor to have you here today. This is our Freedom Month broadcast, and we welcome you from Australia to South Africa. And do you have a message for the people of South Africa just for this month, being Freedom Month?
Oh, I have many messages for people in South Africa. I mean, I'm still South African in my spirit, and my heart is still in South Africa. So, I want to wish South Africa well. There is no country in the world like South Africa. The community spirit that is evident in South Africa cannot be found anywhere else in the world. So, it's a unique country. It's Mandela's Rainbow Nation. So my best wishes to the country on Freedom Day.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was beautiful. Very warm, kind, compassionate, thoughtful message from you. And we can see that link, that connectivity
That's
to our
right. Yeah.
country will never go away. So, Pearl, let's start at the very beginning. You grew up in South Africa, a country with one of the most complex histories in the world
Oh, yeah.
when it comes to race, inequality, and access. How did growing up here shape your understanding of equity before you even had the language for it? What was your experience of education as a young person in South Africa?
Mm.
And were there women in your life, teachers, family members, who modeled what empowerment looked like?
I really liked that question about not having the language to describe it, because I think we feel inequity long before we have the language to describe it. What a lovely question. So I think it was embedded into everyday life, as you would know, Michelle, growing up in much the same way that I had. We knew of some groups who had access, and who didn't, who had opportunities, and all of this was crafted along racial and economic lines. So even as a young person, I think it was something that was quietly in the background, but we were aware of it. And we knew that nothing was neutral. There was no such thing as a racially neutral space. So I think that shaped everything that I felt as a student growing up in Merebank first and then in Chatsworth. So, my experience of education was shaped by aspiration, like wanting to make something of my life. And as you are aware, both my parents were teachers, so school leaders when they resigned from the profession. So education was deeply valued by both our families. It was seen as a pathway to a better life, to dignity and social mobility and so on. And so I'm very grateful for that. So, but at the same time, I think education reminded us of the inequalities, because when I was ready to go to university, there was just one university in Durban that would take people like us, as you know. And if you wanted to go to the other university, you needed a permit to go to Natal, whereas the rest of us went to the University of Durban Westville, as it was then. It's now called the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I think succeeding in education was us navigating those very inequitable spaces that other people didn't have. I was very fortunate that my father, like yours, Michelle, was
Mhm.
not patriarchal. He was brought up in the patriarchy, but he wanted different things for me.
Mhm.
Being a girl, and we were ruled in the sense that, young girls would have probably chosen marriage or, working and things like straight after school. And my father wanted something different for me. He wanted an education and a profession. I know you said ask about the women, but
Mhm.
I was fortunate to have my father, but I was also surrounded by very strong women. So I
Mhm.
have strong women, my aunts, my mother, my mother first, and then my aunts, within my family. I think, like my mum being a school teacher, she modeled what an empowered woman should look like. And she too might not have had the language, but she knew that she couldn't just give in to what men wanted. She was committed to having strong girls. So, those I think those early influences would have shaped not only my understanding, but also my own sense of purpose growing up under that. And I'm pretty sure it must have been exactly the same for you as well.
Mhm. Thank you
Yeah.
for that, Pearl. That was heartwarming. And of course, it resonates with me because we have parallels growing up together,
Yes.
coming
Yes.
from
Yes. Yes.
Merebank and
Yeah.
our church life, and just those intersections in our lives. From where we're sitting now, I guess that really was the priceless part of our entire
Mm.
lives. When we look at it from this stage and this phase of our lives, because it was
Yes.
the beginning, and the beginning always matters. So, Pearl, South Africa post apartheid or apartheid, as many of our fellow South Africans
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
pronounce it, yeah, carried enormous hope. The
Mm.
Rainbow Nation vision, yet in Yet inequality in education persisted. As
Mm.
someone who lived through that transition, what did it teach you about the gap between policy and lived reality?
That's another fabulous question. Well done with the questions. The post-apartheid,
Mhm.
I think was filled with hope. I mean, I was part of the first elections in 1994, and it was such a hopeful time, soon after Nelson Mandela was released, and, we were in such high spirits and we wanted so many good things for South Africa. And the Rainbow Nation symbolized all of that, the unity and this promise of things being different, of equality. Lots of us expected so much. I had just started teaching at that time.
Mhm.
And so I was in a school, and we wanted policy frameworks that were going to be different, especially for education, because prior to this, remember, there was limited access to so many things, to good schools and sporting facilities and money. And, we would look at the schools that had a lot, racially privileged schools, and we wanted schools like that. However, and that's the however, which eventually led to my leaving South Africa. It was something that became evident over time that goodwill and policy alone would not transform reality. And those inequities and those structural inequalities, which were rooted in our history, began to persist. Schools remained unequally resourced, so we didn't have that. We didn't have access to all the opportunities. It didn't automatically translate into better conditions. And so, we saw the social inequities. And remember, if there were inequities at school, it was just then going to translate and persist into society. And that's when criminality set in because we
Mhm.
didn't have the resources that we wanted. So I think what it taught me is that yes, the equity work was there, but it had to go beyond just intention. It had to become a bit more sustained, that we wanted more systemic change. So, we were becoming very critical just a few years after the new government came in. And I think those tensions started to become very evident in our societies, and lived experience, as you know, started to transform, and lots of things began to unravel in the post-apartheid years, which is unfortunate. Yeah,
Sad but true, Pearl.
yeah.
And I agree with you. Those were, I'd say it was beyond teething problems because of the seriousness of the moment,
Mm, mm.
freedom came with a price, right? So, what was the moment or series of moments that led you specifically to Melbourne? Was leaving South Africa an emotionally difficult decision? What did you carry with you? And what did you leave behind?
Oh, it was probably one of the most emotional decisions I've ever made in my life, So I don't think it was a single moment, but it was a process, of reflection, and there were circumstances that began to shape the decision. But it was gradual. It was not something. My father was a very staunch supporter of the new government, the democratic government. So he wanted us to stay and didn't want the brain drain on the country. And, he was a member of the ANC. So, he would have wanted us to remain in South Africa. Um, but, circumstances began to work against us. Schools became quite crowded and teachers were in excess. So it was a period of great redundancy, you know, what they call the um, redeployment era, where teachers were being sent to schools on a temporary basis. It wasn't very stable, so for us as professionals, we needed other opportunities. And then, of course, there were children on the way as well. And so,
Mm.
it was a painful decision, very complex, very emotional, because South Africa is not just a place, it's not a country. The minute I hear the word, I'm not thinking, oh, it's this geographic spot at the southernmost tip of Africa. No, it's my identity. My community is in South Africa. My heart is in South Africa. So leaving South Africa meant that I was stepping away from my roots. And it
Mhm.
was, it was painful. It was like being uprooted and stepping away to something else. But you know, I carry South Africa with me everywhere. My values, my community, my faith,
Mhm.
my commitment to education. Still to this day, I still work in education. All of it is here because of South Africa. It's not something that and so I have such an affinity for South Africa. You can see with the both of us because we are phenotypically Indian.
Yeah.
So if I meet someone in Australia and they say, where you're from, and I say South Africa, and like, oh, you're not the typical South African. We didn't expect that you'd look like a South African. But this is me, and my roots are in South Africa. So that's my family. Here it's an adopted element. I've adopted Melbourne as home, and uh, but culturally and in my roots, I'm always South African, and it's very difficult to replicate any of that when you
Marvelous.
immigrate. Immigration is a different form of loss. You lose something and you don't gain it. And, I go back for holidays to South Africa, but it's painful even leaving then because, the
Um,
connection is still so strong after so many years. Mm.
wow, Pearl, that that was a very touching answer, I should say. It meant a lot to me
Yeah.
because well, we have our beautiful friendship. Thankfully, we have technology and we can continue our friendship. So, arriving in Australia as a South African, how did you experience the country's own relationship with race,
Mhm.
diversity, and inclusion? What surprised you? And what felt achingly familiar?
I think the diversity is quite prominent in Australia. Um, Diversity, for example, Melbourne is known as multicultural Melbourne, quite
Mhm.
common. Um, I think it's acknowledged, but it's not felt. I think what I started to experience in Melbourne was experience of navigation again. So I had to learn how to navigate um, because I'm here, but I don't think I'm always seen. So like I said earlier, my identity is sometimes flattened by the fact that I could be from a different part of the world. And so, that's a little discouraging in a way. Um, but, I think I've enjoyed inclusion in other respects. So I've been a teacher for many years in Australia, and then I became a lecturer and worked in higher education. So, I think I still continue to experience the tensions even here. There's a different kind of visibility when you work in education, because you're fronting up to a group of students more than once in the day. And
Mm.
so I've explored that through my own research and through my teaching as well. But I think it's a bit disorienting. I'm sure most immigrants will agree. Australia is now familiar to me. I've been here for over 25 years, so it's a long time. But at the same time, and I can say this very comfortably, 25 years, but the root is still in South Africa.
Wow. Huh? So you've built an impressive senior academic career in Australia.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Pearl. You've done so well. For many immigrants, institutions can be spaces of invisible exclusion, where
Yeah.
the doors are open, but the culture says otherwise. Did you
Mm.
ever feel that? And how did you navigate it? Were there moments where your background or identity became a factor in how you were perceived? Who were your allies in those moments?
That is true. There are moments where the doors are wide open. And there were many moments like that for me, and I have to thank God for that. But
Mhm.
the Australian system is not designed for people like me.
Wow.
So yeah, it's not because the experience is subtle. There are times when you feel overlooked
Mhm.
and you need to constantly prove yourself because you come from a different country. So I think, there's a level of profiling and stereotyping, and it
Mhm.
shapes the way that you're being perceived by society. I speak with an accent.
Mhm.
I'm culturally different.
Mhm.
Racial identity comes in from a different space in the world. So I think it all influences the way in which we're accepted. But like you said, I've been around long enough at this stage for me to
Mhm.
have found my place. So, I'm fairly comfortable in the institution that I work in because I've been at the university for so long. But I know that when someone comes in for the first time, that difference um, is not easy for them to navigate and negotiate as well. So I think what made a difference for me was finding a new tribe.
Mhm.
And I use the word tribe very intentionally because of the African Association.
Mhm.
So, because the tribal element is in South Africa. So I had to find friendship circles and colleagues who recognized the inequities and began, like me, to actively challenge them. So I think that was very important to develop networks. But it's apart from the network, I had to have a strong sense of myself and my purpose and become grounded in the work that I do. So it's, very strategic formation of that. And as you know, I've retained some of my networks in South Africa, like you,
Mhm.
because I still find strength in reaching out and, having, even if it's conversations in a digital sense, the conversation is still very affirming and very strengthening to who I am, and that's important as well. Mm.
That's great, Pearl. And, I can attest to that. Those conversations are very meaningful, especially to me at this stage of
Mm.
my life. I enjoy them. It's helping me to grow further. And
Of
to
course,
have
yes.
you in my life that way, well, I consider it one of the blessings of my life. So you are now the Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion. What does this prestigious academic role entail, Pearl?
Oh, look, it's in our faculty, it's relatively new. Um, so what it involves is embedding equity into the faculty. So I work in education. So we embed equity into the fabric of what we're doing as teachers, as researchers, as policymakers, and within the faculty culture. So as Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion, I work with staff and with students to create more inclusive environments. And like I said, I'm fairly comfortable in the space now, and we begin to identify and address barriers and ensure that everyone feels included. So, from the language that we use to the spaces we create to the people that we encounter, all of that becomes integral to the work that I do. So I think I try to create accountability. So, and just helping people to commit to equity that is meaningful and is not just performative. So performative equity means, I'll just do it because it's going to make me look good and I dress it up and I make it
Mm.
look like a virtue. but it's just a performance, then I don't want that kind of element. You want it to be a bit more authentic and someone who is actually genuinely feeling like there have been people who have been mistreated in the past and they need to now have a seat at the table. And that's kind of where, yeah, that's where I work anyway. That's the space. Yeah.
Marvelous. In a recent feature on growing India in women empowerment, which was published in India's media for International Women's Day, you said that empowering women in education rebalances far more than individual opportunity, that it reshapes families, communities, and societies. Can you unpack that for us?
Such a privilege to be part of that feature because it looks like I was borrowing from another adoption, where the roots of the indentured laborers came from. So, on International Women's Day, I mean, I participated in a program here at our institution as well.
Mhm,
But, it was so good to hear that women are being empowered through education in the way that they are. I think when you empower a girl or a woman, it influences far more than just that individual. It's extending because you are influencing a family, you're
mhm,
influencing decision making within a community, you're influencing well-being and
mhm,
progress. So I think in practice for me, girls and women and their education and their priorities are of utmost importance. So in the work that we were doing there for that particular uh, feature, it was about improving health outcomes and greater economic participation and increased advocacy for girls in education and healthcare more so because many young people who face disease and even through childbirth often lose their lives because there's no medical treatment available to them. You've got children who might be suffering in those contexts. So I can see how empowering just one woman
mhm,
can afford access to an entire family and can
mhm.
change the trajectory of entire groups. So it will shift everything. It will change the expectations. It's going to provide opportunities. So very important. Yep.
Beautiful. So that's the ripple effect. And of
Yeah.
course, you've searched some of your own observation from the research that would have emanated out of that situation. Marvelous, Pearl. You're transforming the world in that way. So the intergenerational benefits of educating women are well
Yeah.
documented. Educated women consistently invest more in the health, well being, and futures of their children. So, why in 2026 are we still fighting for girls' equitable access to education globally?
That's a fabulous question. Thank you. Because you would think that by now in 2026, there would be some form of equity. But the barriers to the education of girls are still deeply entrenched. Poverty is one of the reasons that they will remain in the background. Cultural norms, we talked earlier about our fathers and
Mhm,
not, giving way to the patriarchy. And here again, we've got girls who might be falling by the wayside because of cultural norms. Gender-based violence is another huge factor that prevents women from advancing and girls from advancing. And of course, you've got these systemic inequities, that sees women as being less than
mhm,
second-class citizens. And so these barriers, which are deeply entrenched into our societies, prevent girls from moving forward. So where there's access, where there's support, and where there's safety, some girls might still not be able to succeed because we can't guarantee that in any society. You can empower the girl, but she becomes a target soon after that. So it's not just about, getting the girls into schools. It's about changing conditions in the societies that will allow the girls to thrive. So, you send the girls to school, but you also need to educate the communities that they are living in to say that they need to support the girls. They need to support their girls so that everyone is going to benefit as a result. So we are still fighting for equitable access to the education of girls for sure, even now. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Pearl. Thank you for even keeping the fight going. That's so important in the world
Mm.
today. there is a difference between giving women access to education and
Mm,
making education truly equitable for them. What are the hidden barriers that persist even when
mm.
girls get through the door? What is the university sector specifically getting wrong?
I think access doesn't always translate into equity. So
Mhm,
providing access might not always be equity. So there's still quite a few, like you said, hidden barriers, So what I mentioned earlier about cultural exclusion would be a fairly dominant still. But then there's also financial pressures and the lack of representation, So fewer women are in top leadership roles, especially women of color.
mhm,
And as a result, there's that famous saying online that you would have seen, you can't be what you can't see.
mhm,
So these young girls don't look up and see themselves in any position because there's no one else who looks like them in those positions. And how important it was for us to mention Kamala Harris at the start because she was one of those iconic women who created that representation. And so many little girls around the world were looking at her and oh my goodness, she's the vice president of the United States. And then she became a candidate that was running for the presidency. It changed everything. So
mhm,
I think those are some of the elements that we need to think about because that's changing the way young girls are seeing the world. I think that it's hard to say what universities are actually getting wrong, but I think that we often assume that young women gaining access to the institution is the end point, so they got in and that's
mhm,
wonderful and let's educate the girls. But then when they finish, they might face other barriers getting into the workforce and getting into industry and getting into leadership because they have to continue to navigate another type of environment that was again not designed for them. So, university is one step, but then when they leave, the next step, there's still other barriers. So I think what might be needed is not just us talking about inclusion, but maybe transforming some of those outside structures. And it's very difficult. Remember, there's patriarchal systems that have existed for decades, centuries, and we're trying to undo some of those to allow these young women who are so bright and so innovative and so creative and have so many good ideas. We want them to get into those places too. Yeah. So that's the hard part. Yeah.
wonderful, Pearl. Women
Mm.
remain underrepresented at the top of academic
Yeah. Yeah.
institutions
Yeah.
globally. I mean, we all know that. You have
Mm.
broken through that ceiling. What is, yeah, what is the honest truth about what it costs a woman to get there?
Oh,
And is
yes.
that cost acceptable?
Oh, there's always a cost. You know this, there's always a cost. Um, you know, it's it's emotional labor, first of all, because you invest a great deal as a woman. Then there's the representation that we talked about earlier. And of course, women are somehow more scrutinized in the work that they do, and you'd know this too, than
Mhm,
our male counterparts. So they can get away with certain things, but a
mhm.
woman can't.
Yeah.
So she would appear to be falling short. And I think particularly for women of color,
Mhm,
success is requiring so much more effort, so much more work, and there's so much invisible labor that a woman of color has to invest in order to gain the same level of competent perception as her
mhm,
male counterpart does. Look, ideally we should not be having those costs. We shouldn't even be talking about costs. But I don't think the system has changed enough to allow that to translate into the way that we want. So unfortunately, those labors, those barriers, the burdens still exist. And that comes at a cost. Now, I remember hearing an interview with, I forget her name, but she was an Indian woman who was the CEO of Pepsi.
mhm,
And, she's working, as Pepsi is this billion-dollar industry. And
mhm,
she was called on a mobile phone from home one day to say, remember to pick up the milk on her way home
mhm.
because the mothering was still there waiting for her. So
Yeah.
there's the cost. There's the cost. So she needs to go back. And after all the work she's done in this huge industry, she goes back and she's still a homemaker.
Yeah.
So much invested in that. Yeah.
So, equity and inclusion have become language that almost every major institution now uses.
Mm,
Yet
mm.
many of us have seen these terms, as you mentioned earlier, applied merely performatively. In your
Yeah,
role,
yeah.
in your role, how do you ensure that they carry real meaning at Monash? And how do you hold the institution accountable?
Well, I'm fortunate in that the institution that I work in has a very clear policy in regard to equity and inclusion. So I'm not the only one, who has this role. So there's faculties across the university. So there's 9 people like me and different faculties who
Mhm,
occupy the role. So I'm in the Faculty of Education. So we have equity and inclusion embedded into our systems. So, policies, practices, everyone has to undergo training in
mhm,
order to remain accountable. So we've got several mechanisms that actually keep us all accountable. So the university is quite dedicated and quite committed to things like that. But more so, I think when we get into our meetings,
mhm,
the work that I do sometimes requires me to ask very difficult questions, about who is actually gaining access and who is benefiting and who is being excluded and who is being silenced. That is the hard part, because I'm asking for transparency beyond what's happening in the meeting. So
mhm,
I think equity is not just about us having policies, but it's translating. But like I said, it's a fairly the university that I work for, in all respects, I think actually sustains this pretty well. It's not just performative with us. We've got quite strong action-oriented ideas. And when I take an idea to either my dean or someone in the vice chancellery, they are very open to the idea, which is for me such good fortune, because remember I'm still this little girl who comes from Durban and still has all the nervousness about it, and then someone opens the door and said, "Come on in," and yes, of course, love the idea. Tell us how you're going to do it. So yeah.
Fabulous. So, what do you say to people who believe equity initiatives comes at the expense of meritocracy? How do you have that conversation
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
dismissing their concern, but also without compromising your own ethos, Pearl?
For sure, for sure. I think equity does not undermine merit. I remember saying this to someone when I had a post on LinkedIn,
Mm-hmm.
that you can overcome racism by adopting more of a meritocratic standard. But I think when you think about meritocracy, it assumes that everyone had the same opportunities, that,
Mm-hmm.
it was a level playing field, but it's not. That
It's
is
never.
very rarely the case. Equity addresses the disparities
Mm-hmm.
so that the talent can emerge. The meritocracy is making an assumption that we all had the same opportunities, but none of us did. As you know, we started with that we didn't have the same opportunities. So I think, when you have conversations with people online, it's very difficult to convince them of things. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference here is that, yes, we want merit, but the conversation has a nuance. It's got a layer to it. You have to acknowledge the concern about assumptions. We didn't have the same opportunities. It's. Do you remember that runner Zola Bud?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, who ran for the Olympics on behalf of South Africa. She
Mm.
was running barefoot
Yeah,
on these tracks. She was running barefoot, and everybody else had the top branded
yeah.
runners, and the whatever they used to run with, the sneakers or whatever. And in Australia they call it runners.
Mm-hmm.
Tackies in South Africa. It took me a while to get there.
Yeah,
Tackies.
yeah.
Yeah. And she was running barefoot because when she was training in South Africa, she trained barefoot. So it was easier for her to run without shoes. Now imagine that. That's a nice way of showing it. Is that meritocracy? Because eventually, remember, she was knocked out because someone else stepped on her foot.
With shoes on.
Yeah, with shoes on. Yeah,
So you work at the intersection of race, gender, and socioeconomic background. So let me ask you this. For a student who lives at several of those intersections at once, say a young woman of color from a low income background, what does
yeah.
Monash or any other university need to do differently to actually serve her well?
I think, and this is very much part of my work,
Mhm.
The university needs to move beyond one size fits all. So,
Wow.
and we've been doing that. So,
Mhm.
sometimes we think, oh, even if you think in terms of clothes, this
Mhm.
suit will fit everyone. It doesn't. So we've moved beyond the one size fits all approach.
Mhm.
If you're thinking about someone from a low economic background, and there are many countries in the world that make applications to universities in Australia, there's financial support involved.
Mhm.
We have to be a little more culturally sensitive and
Mhm.
culturally responsive. So, we have research that's coming out of the global south, coming out of Africa, which is
Mhm.
wonderful. So that the teaching and the interaction in the classroom is sensitive to the needs of students who come from other language and cultural backgrounds. We have representation in leadership, like me, for example, women of color in leadership. And there are support systems now through social networks and clubs and societies that students can belong to that provide students with a sense of belonging, and so they find their space at universities. So I think we do a lot of listening to students, which is very important to us at the university. And when you listen, you start to change the system for the students. It reflects their realities a bit more than it does, just for that one size fits all. Remember when I say one size fits all, I'm thinking, middle class, white, mainstream. It
Mhm.
doesn't work for everyone. So, it's going to have to be looking at other people and their needs as well. Yeah.
Beautiful, a completely different story. And,
Mm.
we spoke about this recently, that Monash is the eighth best university in the world. Now I can see the inside story and it all makes sense why. And I wait for the day you become number one. You deserve it. So,
Oh, I'll pass that on, Michelle.
so you have navigated enormous change, a new country, a new culture, building a career in spaces not always designed for people like you. Where do
Mm.
you draw your strength from? Is there a spiritual or philosophical anchor for you?
Well, I think we've touched on this when we started. My strength comes from my faith. I'm a Christian. So,
Mhm.
I'm not a traditional Christian though.
Mhm.
So, but, I think my faith is something that grounds me. Yeah. And my upbringing. So, my parents, and where I come from, it was a privilege growing up in the places that I did, like you. My community, and you are my community as well. And
Okay.
all of that contributes to a very strong sense of purpose. And I think there's multiple layers to everyone's character and their personality and their well-being. And I believe that the work that we do, both of us, is larger than the two of us. So we both of us, even now by undertaking in this interview with me, you are contributing to something that's bigger than both of us, and it's going
That's
to endure, beyond us. And that's
nice.
what's important to me, and I take strength from that. And I'm in very much in the latter days of my career, but I want to leave a legacy for young women of color who are coming after me, that you can do this, and you can rise, and you can be successful. And so that's the strength. Yeah.
Beautiful. South African culture is deeply communal, family, faith, togetherness. When you relocated to
Mhm.
Melbourne, how did you hold on to that culture? And has it shifted over time? Do your children identify as South African, Australian, or something altogether their own?
I've held on to South Africa.
Uh,
So, it's still very much a part of me, still part of who I am in my community. Lots of my circle are South Africans. I know many, many South Africans. They remain central to my network. So, we seek out South African stores, and the local supermarket where I am actually has a section for South African food, because there are quite a few South Africans in the area that I live in, which is lovely because we get to see lots of yummy things on the shelf,
you
which
can't
is
beat
really
us.
good. Yes, yes, yes. So, not the best ones that you probably have access to. I often used to say to my mom that if only I could transplant Woolworths from South Africa into Melbourne, I would that would just make everything perfect. But we couldn't. I think over time, I mean, like I said, I've been in Australia for over 25 years, and culture and my sense of home has evolved. It's become very complex. So my children have navigated their identities in different ways. I think they are fundamentally South African, but none of them will identify as South African. They have created something that's them because they were very young when they came to Australia. So they've become very Australian. My younger child, probably that my daughter, she's much more Australian than she is South African. So I think they've developed something that's very uniquely their own for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's what we want to hear. You know,
Mm,
love is an important part of humanity. You just don't stay the same. And
mm.
kudos to you and your children for that. And so, Pearl, if you could send a message back to the younger Pearl, the girl I grew up with in South Africa, in
Yeah.
Merebank, Durban, South Africa,
Yes, yes, yes.
sharing the same faith, culture, and society as she was beginning to form ideas about who she was going to be and what she was capable of. What would you want her to know about her journey and her purpose now that you have lived it?
Yes, I was a very uncertain young person lacking confidence and just really, really shy. And if I had to go back and assure my younger self that trust in the process, trust in the path, because even at times when it becomes a bit uncertain,
Mhm.
that's not going to define you. There will be moments when things are going to go terribly wrong, as they do in life. We have circumstances that work against us, but
Mhm.
that will not define you. You will still find your purpose and you will eventually get to where you want to go, and it will be better than you can imagine. I think I grew up, constantly stressing about the small stuff, like they say, sweating the small stuff. And little things used to get to me. And if only I could go back and tell my younger self, don't sweat that. It's going to pass. It's like the Bible says, and it shall come to pass. So it's going to pass, and it's going to eventually get to where you wanted to go, better than you can imagine.
Wonderful, Pearl. So, one book that every young person should read.
Oh, I'm going to say the Bible. But because I think that it's the manual for life for one thing. But if there was a book beyond that, beyond this, I mean, you've probably read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and I think it's become such a timeless book because it's got such powerful life lessons in a very accessible way. Just finding your purpose, finding resilience in life, and finding an inner voice. I think that's what The Alchemist is all about. So it's a kind of book that stays with you. So many people quote from it. You take something away every time that's different. But I know not everyone will read it, but the Bible is worth reading as well. It's one of those books that will become your manual for life. So yeah.
Wonderful, Pearl. And one thing you miss about South Africa that Melbourne cannot replicate.
Oh,
One.
it's the community. You cannot find the warmth of the South African people anywhere in the world. And I've traveled. So
Okay.
I've traveled to the globe,
Mm,
and you cannot find the warmth of South Africa anywhere else. And this has come from people who have visited. So, I have colleagues who have come to universities in South Africa and have come back to Australia, and they said this,
mm,
the people, the South African people are what makes South Africa so very special. I can arrive into Johannesburg Airport at
mm,
or Tambo and just find my way in again because it's the people. They're
mm.
just so happy to see you, and I'm so at home suddenly, and as though the other years didn't exist. So, gosh, the depth of that, you can't find that anywhere else in the world.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And so, Pearl, to end, equity is not a destination. It is.
A commitment.
Mm,
I think
wow.
it is a commitment. So that is just to end your sentence. It's definitely not a destination, it's a commitment. It's like a really good marriage. You commit, but you don't commit once. You commit every single day and you keep going and you just keep going.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. It's been wonderful. Thank you for such fabulous questions that provoked my thinking.
Well, I know you, so I knew where to go and how to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
formulate, in a meaningful way and respectfully as well. I think
Yes, for
that's
sure.
important, especially when you're presenting to the world the story of someone who has lived life on the magnitude you have. It's large, and yet
Yeah,
you walk with true humility in the most beautiful way. And that shyness you speak about as a kid, I think you had it more than I did. Well, I grew up with three boys. It was insane. So I
oh, yeah,
actually
yeah, yeah.
there was an edge to me, I think.
Yes, 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 yes.
Had a beautiful little group of girls in Peniel Fellowship.
For
We were
sure,
little,
for sure. How lucky were we to have that?
yes,
Yeah,
yes, and I think that was the starting point of everything we
it
have
did.
become.
It did, for sure.
And
Yeah,
respect and honor to your mom and dad,
yeah.
to Auntie Pat Munsami, to my father, Danny Subban, to my mom, Sumi Subban. Respect and honor to our parents. I can share this with you because you know them practically as well as I.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
The best we can offer them for those who have left and for the remaining one, the best we
Mm.
can offer them is the life that we now
The
live,
life that we live. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
this, this stage of our lives. And
Mm.
God bless you, Perth, and I love you. God
Oh,
bless.
I love you too, Michelle. That is so lovely. Thank you for having me as well. You make me feel like I'm so important.